This is Beast Class build number 5. Let's get straight into it. So the next step is to get the camera wires installed. We want to install them in such a way that they are long enough so that when we remove this top plate, we do not pull on either end of it. Because there are days that we're going to forget. We do have access to pull the Molexes from the back of the camera before we do that, but just to make things easier, we are not really concerned with weight on this build, so I feel it's best to leave the camera wires fairly long. So what we're going to do is, because this comes with 2 separate wires. Here we have a 3-wire, and then this one here we have, it looks like a 5-wire down to a 4-wire. We are not going to be using a few of the items on this, so I think we're going to use the 3-wire. The way this pinout goes is we've got our 5 to 36 volt, and we've got our ground, then we've got our video, our audio, and our VBAT. For this build, we are not going to be using the audio or the VBAT. The VBAT is so that the camera can show you in the OSD what your battery voltage is at. We do not need that because our flight controller will tell us, and I'd rather use the flight controller OSD than the camera OSD, mostly because it's a lot easier to control in Betaflight. The camera, we need to hook up this separate remote, if you will. So I'll be hooking that up once in this camera's life to get the settings proper and to turn off the OSD, and then after that I will likely never use that remote again. So we're also not going to bother with these 2 pins. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and use this here. So the wires we are concerned with is power, ground, and video. And we definitely don't need it this long, but I'm going to go ahead and hook this up. This goes into the first 3 pins, and we're just definitely going to double check that these pins are the proper pins. Okay, that's hooked up. So this is why I brought this one out. This is a spare camera, so we can kind of see. So first we want the red wire, then we want the black wire, then we want the yellow wire. We got power, ground, video. Very good. That's what we want. So now if we take this off and move this, it actually looks like keeping most of this wire is going to be good. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut it right about, cut about 1.5 inches off of it. Okay, now that that is done, I'm going to go ahead and take this out and put that plate to the side. So what my plan is I do not want to hook anything up to power-wise to the flight controller, because I'm using that ribbon cable. And as you can see, all these pads are broken out down here on the PDB. So we're going to do the power off of the PDB. The video wire, and I know this one does have a VTX wire, and like, let's see here, we've got a VTX wire here, we've got our 12 volt pads, 5 volt pads, we've got a ground, so we can hook that here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook the camera up to the camera here. And then later on, the VTX, I'm going to also hook to the flight controller, just the yellow wire. All the power and ground is going to be done on the PDB. And that will allow us to use the OSD of the flight controller. I'm not sure if it sends that signal through the PDB, and I'd like not to have to worry about that. So with that, I'll get you guys on a closer lens so we can see what's going on and get this wired up. So the first step we want to do here is we want to peel these back, and there you go. We want, that's roughly 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to go ahead and pre-tin these. To do that, I am going to just grab them and hold them in place with the quad hands. I'm going to get a clean soldering tip here and just go ahead and solder these guys up. So this camera is rated for 5 to 12 volts, and they would have you put this on a 5-volt regulator. I am not going to do that. What I plan on doing, and what I always do, is if the camera is capable of doing something like a mixed voltage like that, I always go with something in the middle. If we put this on a 5-volt pad, and that regulator for whatever reason screws up just a little bit, we'll lose voltage and lose video on that camera, even just for a moment, and we do not want something like that happening, especially on a machine this large. So what I'm going to do is hook these to a 12-volt pad, and this way, if there's a little bit of a hiccup in that regulator, and say it goes down to 11 volts, we're still going to have camera. It's not going to matter. You know, it might fuzz the screen a little bit, but I'm not concerned with that. I am concerned with the camera shutting off completely and then turning back on once it has voltage. I've had that happen. I don't like it, so that's what we're going to do here. So, as you can see, I've got a 12-volt pad right here and a ground right here. That's nice and easy at the front of the board. We're going to go straight for that. This 12-volt is... you'll see exactly why I do not pre-tin right now, because the way I do this is I go up from the bottom of the board. Okay, so now I've got to like hold this precariously and heat up this pad so it seats like that. And then that's all we need. Okay, so we have our power wire in. Next, we're going to do a ground right next to that. And this is a lot easier when you don't pre-tin these. So now I can just stick that through there. I can rest this just like this. And that will hold it in place long enough for me to solder it. Once again, rest this in place. Okay, so don't. All right, there we go. So you're gonna try this one more time. Plop that there, and then this can balance in place, and then we can solder that a lot easier. So I am touching both the wire and the solder pad. And once it heats up, I just give a little dab. Okay, now that those are all set, I want to take my camera wire And I'm going to put that up here to the camera pad right there. On a normal build, I would use this ground, this 5-volt, and this camera wire. Again, we have a ribbon cable in between these two, and I did not run separate wires. I would have had separate wires from here, signal 1, 2, 3, 4, power ground, all that stuff would go to the underside of this flight controller. But I did not do that, so that's the reason why we're doing it this way. So same thing, I am going up from the bottom. Into the camera pad. And then I can rest this just like that. And that's it. So that is our camera installed. Then I will give this wire a bunch of twists. Next, we're going to be installing the TBS Unify Pro 32 HV. This is a smoking little VTX. And I say little, it's really not little. I have a full bench test. I'll put the link for it right there. This guy, she puts out a little bit of power, and I'll leave you to watch the video to see just how much. So we're gonna install this, and we want to install this in such a way that we are not going to get into the arms. As one thing I had noticed when I did a brief test earlier. If we take one of the arms here, this is going to sit right about here. And then next to it, we're going to have a couple of standoffs. And as you can see, that really eats into the room that's underneath this. What I think we're going to be able to do is kind of stuff it underneath here. And I also want to have this at the back of the quad. So in the event, well, that's for two reasons. So I want to have this towards the back of the quad, mostly for two reasons. The first reason is because the antenna is going to be mounted here, and we only have so much length on this antenna cable. The other reason is if we're flying forwards, if for whatever reason one of these arms is hit and we break some screws, which I know is going to take a considerable amount of force to do, I don't want an arm kind of flying in and impaling this guy into the wiring. I know there's not really much that we're going to do if this does come in and connect with wires, but I think the less parts in the way, the better. And again, I don't foresee that happening. They supply us with some pretty beefy screws, but you never know. This thing's going to be able to do like 130 miles an hour probably, so just something to be aware of. So I'm thinking if I take this one and place it here, that leaves us a little bit of room where I might be able to snake this guy underneath if I do that like this. And I'm just going to kind of stuff these wires and pull them underneath the quad for now, just to see if that fits. And it's highly likely you guys will never see this part. So let me do that. So if I place this guy here, I'm not impressed with that because that is touching the underside of that PDB, and that will likely send some arcs. The other issue here is if I put this is just a little too wide. It's not going to actually fit to the arm there. So that kind of leaves us with underneath here. And I think that it might actually do that. If I put this under there and then remount this to the top of the quad. So that's what I'm going to do. So after considering my options where this is going to go, I have decided. Initially, I was going to put it underneath here. That worried me because these wires would chafe on the top of this, and if they ever expose themselves, that might give us a faster ground to the carbon. So I don't want to take that risk. The other issue is because this is so thick, it's not going to fit underneath the PDB without touching the PDB. I could put black tape or something like that, but to me, it's not worth that. So what I have decided to do is I'm going to remove this antenna housing, this antenna mount, and I'm going to put that on the top of the quad. And then what I'm going to do is snake this underneath these power wires. And to protect these power wires, I'm going to put a piece of shrink tube over this, I think. And that should keep it from chafing. The only thing that sucks about doing it this way is I'm going to have to disconnect the antenna every time I want to remove the top. Which is nice that they give us this access hole, so maybe that's not going to be that often. Now that that's moved out of the way, let's head back to this guy and see. This does fit fairly well, and this is hitting my zip tie. So what I'm going to do here is remove this zip tie. So before we install this, we want to go ahead and make a note of the pinouts. This is on the bottom of the unit, and this is where we're going to be sticking it down. So once this is stuck down, we're not going to be able to see what's what. So we want to make a note. Our first wire, the red one, is the 7 to 26 volts. That's to power this unit. Our next wire is the ground. That's our ground for this unit. The next two, the orange and the black. The orange is a 5-volt out, and then this black is a secondary ground. This is to power our camera should we want to do that. But because we have run this wire, that's not how we're going to be doing it. So we can remove this black and this orange. I will be doing that momentarily. This yellow is our VTX wire or video. And then CRSF. So these two wires here are for the crossfire. So know that anywhere that we're going to run this, our crossfire has to be that close to it. So that's something to be aware of. Also, the white one is the RX and the green one is the TX. You can set that inside of the crossfire unit if you somehow mix up the two. So that's not that big of a deal. So I'm going to take this off and take a moment to take out those two wires. There we go. Just like that. One of you guys had suggested that I use some thermal tape, and I 100% agree with that. I don't know how thick that thermal tape is, but because we have no protruding objects, this is completely flat. Thermal tape I think will be the best. I do not have any, and I will likely pull this off and put thermal tape on it. For now, I'm just going to use this 3M VHB tape. And the reason that we want the thermal tape is this unit gets very hot, and it does have protections inside of it that will shut the unit off, or at least choke back the power should it reach temperature. So right now this one is set so that it shuts itself off at 100, I believe it's 105 C. That's your default setting for it to shut off, and that does work. This did get up to 215 degrees and shut off, and I believe that's I believe that's 105 C. So anyway, I believe that thermal tape will be the best over this VHB, but this is what I have. So this is what I'm going to go with for now. I will likely swap over. So I'm just, really a pair of scissors would do this better than these little nips, but in the interest of time, I'm cutting with these. So we can take that, and I'm just putting 2 pieces like that. That should hold it, no problem. Sorry about the focus. My camera is deciding it wants to focus wherever it wants. So to get this up under there, pretty good. I think right there will do. And then again, we want to double check with the arms to make sure that we're not going to hit anything, which is good. So to keep the VTX from chafing into these wires, I put a wrap of electrical tape around this whole thing. This is 2 layers on the bottom, and with the way this is going to sit, that should be okay. I like this location because we can run the wires from this to be powered. I believe they're long enough. Yeah, just barely. Just barely. So the other thing I like is if we have this arm mounted here, we are away from any of the antenna bits, and I'm going to have this mounted on a 90 degree instead of this straight out hookup. So that's going to work there. This is definitely where we're going to mount this. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and remove the backing to the VHB tape. And I'm putting the antenna MMCX connector to the right. And I'll show you in a moment what that will do for us. I'm just going to push this in as far as I can get it, and then pack it down. Now that we have that installed, I want to take our wiring and go ahead and clip this in place. This is locking, so just listen for that audible click. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to clip these ends pretty much as long as possible. We need this video wire needs to make it all the way to the VTX here. So let's go ahead and do that. Again, I'm going to cut this as long as possible. A lot of times I like to leave a little bit of excess, so if I ever need to utilize these ends for another project, like something like this, I can just strip back and solder to this, and I still have this connector. So the first thing I'm going to do is run this video wire underneath the flight controller and pull it out the other side. And as you can see, it is going to fit somewhat nice. So I'm only going to cut, let's see, about a ½ inch off of it. Once we're set with that, I'm going to go ahead and strip it and pre-tin it. Okay. Next, I will grab the tweezers. And we're going to go ahead and install this. There's a little bit more slack in this than I want, but I think it's going to be fine. So this goes into the VTX pad right there. Once again, I can lean those there. Okay. So that is our video wire installed. Next, we've got to power the unit. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to drag our power wires underneath this, and we're also going to cut this as close to this as we can. I think that's more than ample. Move that off to the side. And let me get you guys on a closer lens. Okay, so that should show you a little bit better. Front of the quad is this way. This is our earlier installed camera wire. And here's our VTX. So next we are going to work on these power wires. So these wires I am going to leave as long as they are. I'm going to go ahead and strip them both now. I want about a 1/16 of an inch. That one's a little too long. This one here is perfect. There you go. So usually I like to run these from the bottom, and I'm not going to end up doing that. The reason being is because we are on the top of the plate. I could run them through the bottom, but then they're kind of exposed in this rather large hole, so I don't want to do that, especially when we got a lot of exposed bits down the bottom. So for this one, I'm going to go through the top and solder it from the bottom. It's not going to be very easy to do, and it's definitely going to be much harder to film. I'm going to do my best here. So this, we need a 12-volt pad. To hook up this VTX, we're going to do things a little bit differently. This PDB allows us a feature that is not included on most PDBs. Because we're going to be putting a GPS on this likely, and just by very nature of this thing being so large, we're going to plug it in and walk away from it a great distance before arming it. So that this VTX doesn't sit there and cook while we're walking away from it, or let's say we crash or we're waiting for satellites or any of that sort of thing. We have the ability to have that on a switch on a Tyrannus or what controller you're using. So that's done with these 4 pads here. I believe it's just these top ones that are switchable. I'm not certain about these bottom ones. So we're going to hook to these top ones. As you can see, it's SW. So that top one there is a 12-volt pad, and then this is ground. And then down here, this is a 12-volt, and this is ground. I'm going to assume that these are both switchable, but do not quote me on that. For certain, I know that the top one is switchable. So we're going to go ahead and pre-tin those, and we're also going to go ahead and pre-tin our power leads off the VTX. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, and I want to make sure that these are cut no no longer than the pad. So I'm gonna go ahead and trim the ground just a little bit. And this positive just a little bit. There we are. Okay, next, I'm gonna take our positive wire, and that's gonna go on first. This is why I like these bent tweezers, so we can get into tight locations like this fairly easily. And we're just gonna apply a little bit of heat and sink that guy right there. Repeat the process for this ground. And there we have it. So that is our VTX installed. Now we can go ahead and put these wires back. What I'm gonna do here is remove this Molex, if I can get it, and just throw a couple of twists in these wires just to clean it up a little bit. Just gonna make sure that these crossfire wires kind of steer clear. We're gonna wrap those separate. Okay, so now that that is set, I can go ahead and plug this back in. So again, this is lockable, so we're listening for that audible click right there. Okay, so that's how we're running these wires here. And they just kind of tuck in place out of the way. I did remove this guy, so I'm gonna put that back on now. Just to give me a little bit of room to get the soldering iron in there. Okay, so now that that is set, put that back on and tighten this down. So before we button this up, a couple things that we need to take care of. To make this pad switchable, we need to first bridge the pin in and pin out with the R5. So to do that, I'm going to take a little bit of this wiring here that we are not going to use. We can bridge it across the top, or we can make like a U out of the wire and then bridge it below. I think I'm just going to make that U out of the wire and bridge it below, about a 1/2 inch long. And I'm going to go ahead and pre-tin each side. Okay, so I went ahead and fed that in through the bottom to the pin in, pin out pad, and just solder that right in place, like that. Next, I want to take the other end of it, flip it around, and send it through the R5 pad. This right here is what we're doing, and what's nice about this is it's so short. Once you get it in place and one side soldered, you do not need to hold it. Okay, so that is all set. We can go into the CLI now and turn R5 into pin in, pin out. And then we can go to our Tyrannus and set that up in the modes tab. And then we can have the VTX on a switch. This pad is off by default. So when you plug everything in and your VTX doesn't work, don't freak out. We want to bridge the center and the right pad. This is a 1/2 voltage pad. If you wanted to do full voltage, you can bridge the center and the left. But we're doing these two here. The reason we're doing this is because we do not want to send full voltage to the flight controller. We will burn it out. As you can see, they pre-tin pretty easy, and then just beat up that solder, and that will bridge the pads. That's all we need to do there. Special note, this is the second version. The difference between the second version and the first version is, as you can see, this pad here is square. That's our ground pad. The first version, it was over here, and that didn't make any sense. A ground pad should be square, so they made it square. The other difference is the first version had not silk screening, but they actually removed some of this top layer of the PCB board and used that to kind of etch the writing on top of this. And people had issue with that. They were kind of crossing pads over, so things were getting grounded that shouldn't be grounded. So they repaired that in this version. So starting over here on the bottom left, we have our ground pad. Above that, right, this one here, that's our positive pad. Above that, we have our channel 1 out, and above that, we have our channel 2 out. Then down here, as you can see, there's 2 LEDs. The one to the left is the green LED, and the one to the right is the red LED. Continuing along the top here, this first pin out is the channel 3 out pad. The second pad is the channel out 4 pad. And the way these work, the channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, and channel 4, they are assignable inside of the Crossfire module. Or if you're using Lewis grips, you do it in there. So if you hook an RX or a TX, it doesn't matter. You can set that. So those wires really don't matter, and that's very nice. So if you wanted to set one for smart audio, if you wanted to set one for a RX TX, it leaves you a lot of options. And the nice thing is you don't need to go back and resolder something because you swapped the wire or whatever. You just do it in the Crossfire and you're good. And these final 2 pads, this one here is the BST SCL, and then this one up here on the right hand corner is the BST SDA. Finally, we have our boot button is right here, and this is our CFL antenna connector. I've switched to the T15 ILS. This is a conical tip. This isn't quite the micro iron, but as you will be able to see, it's a very tiny iron, and this is going to drastically help with this here. So I'm just going to heat that joint up a little bit, add a little bit of solder, and then bam. And that is a nicely soldered joint. So the next pin is our positive wire. Just going to slide that through there, as you can see. Oops. So, not easy to do here. Tighten that up. Perfect. Okay, that's number 2. This is going to be our channel out wire. Channel 1 out wire. And I believe I'll hook this one to an RX pad. Set that right there. And solder it on. Okay, there's that. As you can see, this pad here, it's I'm gonna not screw with it. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna not screw with that pad. And then finally, I'm going to take the supplied white wire and put that into the channel 2 pad. This will be our TX. This will go to our TX on the flight controller. And again, that does not matter. We can change it in the Crossfire. So A little bit of solder there, make sure it's on the pad, and perfect. And that is all. So when installing this Crossfire module, we need to keep this both close enough to this VTX, because we're going to take these two wires and connect them here. So that kind of pulls us to the back half of the quad. And the other thing that we need to keep close is the antenna. So the way this is going to work, I just kind of placed an arm here. That's about where it's going to set. We're going to have the top, which is going to set about here. And then we have our 3D printed setup for the antenna. This is going to mount right here. Now, I went ahead and purchased, this is the Immortal T. This is the elongated one. I think this is 150 millimeters. So this is going to sit somewhere about here. And then we have pretty much enough wire to hit almost every single corner except for this far one. So we can pretty much put this wherever we choose to. The only thing I need to look at to see is if this wire needs to go around the quad like such, or if there's going to be enough space where I can fish this through the top plate. So that'll be out of the way. And then when we open this, we can safely kind of flip this over. So yeah, that'll be the best way to do it. Run that wire there, because as you can see with this plate, that's going to cover this up. And then we're going to have a GoPro mounted here, so that's probably going to cover that hole up. And do we really want to be fishing this through every single time? And the answer to that is no, especially because it's going to get chafing on both sides of this wire. We could do it that way, but I think just fishing it around the corner there, and then when we pull this up, pull our wire from the camera out, and then flip this over and then unplug from here. I think that's the best way to do this. So that's what we're going to go forth in. I think I'm going to mount this right on top of the MCU. I think that's how we're going to do it. And that should allow us enough antenna length to get to. If I kind of just put this there. Oh my God, that's perfect. So that right there is where that's going to go. I really think that's going to be perfect. If I set this here, go around here. Oh, it doesn't get any better than that. Yeah, so that's beyond the shadow of doubt. That is where we're going to mount that. So to do that, I'm just going to cut a little piece of VHB tape. And we're going to go ahead and stick that to the back. And I want to cut it small enough so that we can still get to the pads, because we're going to solder onto those very shortly. I'm going to stick that there and just kind of really press it in place. So now that that is all set, I'm going to take these wires here and figure out if this is going to fit right there. These are going to come up from the side and right about there. So I'm going to go and clip a good 3/4 of an inch off of these, and then we're going to go strip them and pre-tin them. So while we're doing that, let's get you guys a closer look. I want to go ahead and strip and pre-tin these wires here. Same thing, we're going to go very small with the amount that we strip these. And I am not very fond of these wires. These are, I'm going to assume that they are silicone coated, but they don't strip very well by hand. We got our solder, just waiting for the iron to heat up, and right there. I'll hold these right there and just pre-tin these. This is still that micro-ish conical tip, so As you can see, that makes very short work of that. Hold the tweezers with the quad hands and let the tweezers hold the part. Okay, so next in channel 3, I'm going to go ahead and put this green wire. And again, these do not matter, or should not matter, which hole you put them in, because we can remap it inside of the crossfire. And if I am wrong, I will absolutely let you know and apologize profusely, but that's not going to happen. Okay, so next I'm going to install the green wire into channel output 3. And this wire is just a pinch too long, so I'm going to cut it after I solder it. That's that one all set. Next, I'm going to grab the white and put that into channel 4. Right next to it. Perfect. So now we go ahead and solder this one in place. Did I just... Okay, that looks way worse than it actually is. So now that that's all set, I'm going to go ahead and nip these clean. Okay, that's perfect. As you can see, I did not melt them together. I'm just going to tap this with the soldering iron just to clean up that joint just a little bit. And just hold this wire. There we go. Okay. So that is all set. And next, okay, so this is going to go right here, right on top of that MCU. I'm going to go ahead and pull off this backing. Okay, there we go. And as you can see, we're only getting a little bit of this sticking. I mean, good 50% of this is not going to hold anything, but that's not really a concern. We just want to make sure that the part that's sticking to that is the part that's going to stick to the MCU. So there we go. That's all set there. And you'll notice that I'm running this along the inside here, away from our bind button. So we're going to connect these down here. As you can see on the PDB, I've got a 5-volt pad here and a ground pad here. So that's where these are going to go. Okay, so I'm just going to take this and then wrap this underneath the board, like so. Perfect. And then just put a nut just to capture this back. Okay. So next, I'm going to take our 5-volt red wire and we're going to place that right there. I'm going to go ahead and cut this to length before I do anything more. Okay, and now with that, I can pull this flight controller up and move it kind of out of the way. Right about there will be good. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is strip and pre-tin these wires. And these guys, I believe, are going to go from the top down. Again, I hate doing that, but because they're going to be run in that location in between the flight controller and the PDB, that we won't be able to get to the bottom of the PDB to do so. Let me grab my grippers. I'll hold these where you can see them. Right there. A little off camera. That's better. And again, these are cut a little bit long, so after I pre-tin them, I will cut them down. I'm not getting any heat transfer. There we go. And the trick is we want a clean iron tip to do this. Whoop. Hold still. Thank you. There you go. Those are cut to length and pre-tinned. Perfect. There you go. So now I'm going to run these back onto the board and grab our power wire first. The other thing I'm going to do is just kind of spin these just a few times just to keep them somewhat tame underneath the board. Okay, I want our bent one. And this one's going to go to the 5-volt pad right there. Then we're going to flip the whole quad over and solder it from the back side. Of course, this just fell out. And you can see it. There it is. Right there. That's what we're going to be soldering. Now we're just going to give that a quick tap. Very good. And then right next to that, we are going to add that negative wire. Okay, there we go. And as you can see, I kind of folded the wire over just a little bit to hold it in place. And we're going to solder that, and then once we're done with that, we're going to cut that off. Go ahead and make sure we heat up that pad enough. Very good. And this is where these bent clippers come in handy, so we can really reach into a place like this with no issue and clip that clean. Same thing with this one. Clean this up a little bit. I'm gonna run this crossfire wire right there. Yeah, perfect. That's gonna run underneath as well. Very good. And then lastly, we want to figure these two wires out. So these are going to be our RX and TX on a UART. And this is channel 1 and channel 2. So for this build, we're going to call this one TX. So this we need in an RX pin. So let's find an open UART. So this is something that we want to kind of be paying attention to as we're building. If you saw that there's going to be too much stress on those wires. I cut them just a little too short, and what would happen is on the edge of that board, with the vibrations and them constantly pulling, it will eventually chew into those wires, and those being power and ground, not only will we lose signal to our receiver, but we also run the chance of sending sparks and fiery doom through the air. So I want to reposition this crossfire module so that we do not have any wires that are pulled as bad as those were being pulled on. So now these wires are a little less taut. Now that that's all set, so again, this is going to be our TX wire. We need it into an RX, and then this white one is going to be our RX wire, and we need that to a TX. So we need to find an open UART. This is going to be our TX wire, and this is going to be our RX wire. So anytime we have a TX wire, we want to put it to an RX. Where TX, we're sending the signal. RX, we're receiving the signal. And then like this one, this is a RX wire, so you want to find a TX. We're receiving from a sending. So for these, I'm just going to go right here. As you can see right there, there's RX2 and TX2. That's going to be our guys right there. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this wire right about that long. I think that's going to do it. Let me just kink it and see what happens when we drag it around. Yeah, I think that's going to be pretty good. I think so. So just cut a little bit more than we need. And then we are going to strip and pre-tin these. And these wires we're going to loop around the bottom of the board, like I like doing. We could switch back to a thicker tip, but this one's it's just on the iron and it's working out pretty well. So it is what it is. I'm not using this for any specific reason other than that it was already on the iron. Okay, so we decided that this yellow was going to be a TX, so this needs to go through the RX2 pad, which is the far one. So next we want to take our RX wire and we want to clip that into a TX pad. As you can see, we're going for this TX2 pad right next to the previous pad. Right there. And what I want to do is make sure that if we have any solder spikes, we're not going to be hitting this positive wire that runs right next to it. And there we are. So that is our crossfire module installed. So we got the camera wire installed, we got the VTX installed, we got the crossfire installed. We made the VTX switchable. We're gonna have to do that in beta flight. That'll be a later video. We also set up the PDB so that we can send the proper VBAT voltage to the flight controller so that we don't fry our flight controller. We set that to half a voltage, and that'll be, I think, like 25 volts. And if I'm not mistaken, this will handle up to 26, so that'll be good. We're gonna have to set the graph in Betaflight as well, so that this reads out the proper voltage once that's all said and done in our OSD. There's still a lot left. We still have the arms to put on. We still have the motors to put on. We got the airfoils to put on. But pretty much most of the main electrical is complete at this point, beyond doing a lot of stuff in the computer. So that's super exciting. The only thing I couldn't test is the VTX, because that is currently on that unpowered switch. That is going to be switchable. We have to set that up, and the switch is off by default. So I have no way to test if this is working, but it seems like everything else is working. So I am excited for that. If you found this video helpful, click that thumbs up button. If you're following along and you think we're going too slow, or maybe for some reason somebody thinks we're going too fast, leave me a comment below. And if you haven't done it already, just go ahead and punch that subscribe button, because you only get to do it once, and it's fun, and I'll catch you later. Peace.